All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Kyle Magatelli from the Student Doctor Network, and we're back for another Expert Advice Live. Thank you for joining us this evening. Dr. Emil Chuck, Director of Advising Services for HIPSA, is here to answer your questions. Dr. Chuck, how are you doing?
Hi, good. How hopefully things are going well with you.
Well enough, well enough. There's no sense in getting into the details of me complaining about good problems.
That's fair. All right. Well, I know interview season is just about right around the corner if it hasn't already begun for a lot of applicants. So we might as well just get started and just start asking questions, I guess.
Absolutely. If you have a question for Dr. Chuck, please place them in the chat and we will get to them as best as possible. So, first question, how do I prepare for virtual interviews? How do I prepare for on campus interviews?
So this may take, I'm going to try to summarize this in very, very short periods of time because obviously preparing for virtual and preparing for on-campus involves different sets of logistics. But if we're going to just talk about preparing for interviews in general, hopefully you already have started doing that. And a lot of it comes from the fact that secondary questions should have given you a little bit of insight of the types of questions they are willing to ask you. It's just in written format, and we've covered that when we were talking about secondaries a few weeks ago. So in terms of preparing for virtual interviews and on-campus interviews, even while you're submitting secondaries, you should be on call, be prepared to check your spam, make sure that whatever emails that you get, you check on that as best as you can regularly. Even if you're on an admissions portal, you check it like once a week. Don't be too obsessive about it. Certainly, on the various forums, including our own school-specific forums, in general, it's pretty, we do our very best to have people self-report. So if you hear something, please feel free to just check and make sure, post it on the school-specific forum, and make sure that you are not the only one that receives some sort of notification about, having your application received. Certainly having an invitation for an interview, whether it's one of the recorded interviews like we did, like talked about 2 weeks ago, a Cura Talent, a phone screening interview or whatever, or, you finally start getting an invitation to interview, whether you're in state or out of state. Those things over the years on the SDN have been posted on our forums. So, at least be mindful that that is going to happen. Also be mindful that you might not be in that initial wave of people getting interviews very early on. Do not panic. Do not get upset. It happens. You can only do so much in the early stages of the application process. And at least for the most part, this is a long process. So, we will have a lot of programs keep interviewing all the way up until January, February, March. Possibly into April. Obviously, the DO schools this past year decided to extend their interview season to include the month of June. So there's a lot that can happen in the course of getting an invitation to interview. So please don't panic whatsoever. Make sure that you have a very good routine in being able to receive information regarding getting an invitation to interview. Now, as for preparing, certainly, I would certainly hope that you have, in the same way that you've developed your pre-writing strategy for secondaries, you've done the same thing for interview questions. There are, just as there are people that like to outline how they would answer their questions for secondaries regarding diversity or regarding, what are the things that really make you excited about a school? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Those sorts of things. Hopefully, you should still be working on all of those questions. And there are certainly expected questions you would want in any interview, such as, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Tell us about, teamwork. Tell us about a time that was frustrating. Those sorts of things that you think would come up during secondaries may likely also come up during regular interviews. So probably one of the best things you can do for every single school for which you get an invitation to interview, first of all, review your own secondary application if you've submitted a secondary, just so that you know, what did you answer? What did you say? What did they ask you? And try to give yourself a chance to anticipate whether they're going to ask that question again, but in shorter format, you have a less period of time, or if they haven't covered some things that you would expect them to cover. So I think preparing for interviews in general really is about just giving yourself time to really go over what are questions that they would likely ask. There's plenty of these sample questions that are online on the internet. We have our own interview feedback database that, certainly, those, we would love for you to contribute to as soon as you've had your interviews. If you don't have to deal with a non-disclosure agreement, just pay it forward so that other people have a pretty good idea of what to expect about interviews. So in general, are there really any differences in the types of questions you get one versus another? Hopefully not, but I think in terms of your own confidence in answering questions, that's pretty much what you can really do to prepare. The other things in terms of delivery are going to be minutia, and we'll probably go into that a little bit, as we go through the set of questions that we've developed.
All right, makes sense to me. Again, if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat. When should I request to reschedule an interview?
So I know for many of you, it might be a shock that you might have to reschedule your interview for things like a job or an exam or something that happens to bump against your schedule that you least expected. So certainly, as soon as you know you have a conflict that cannot be resolved, you go ahead and contact the admissions team and tell them you need to reschedule an interview. Sooner is always better than later, because the sooner you can act on it, the more likely the admissions team can find an actual interview spot for you, because interview spots will run out very quickly, especially by the time you get to near the end. I'm serious, near the end of August to near the end of September, when we finally have school, undergrad programs running, or if you're in an SMP, a special master's program, you'll have exams, and you didn't know about it when you first got your interview. So as soon as you know there's a conflict, try to resolve it without having to reschedule first. But if you have to, immediately do what you can to contact the admissions team and see if there's an opportunity for you to reschedule your interview for a different time. It's obviously a little bit easier to do for virtual interviews than it is for on-campus interviews, but that's pretty much the protocol that you need to do. And just be aware that, having to reschedule for later means that your file comes up later for review. And if you're, if you're the type of person that gets really nervous about waiting, you're gonna have to bite the bullet on this one, because there's no way around it if you have to reschedule. So just ask very politely as soon as you're able to, and just see what other options are available. Just be aware that the later we go on in time, the more likely the admissions team is going to say, well, we may have to put you on some sort of a wait list to just make sure that there's an interview spot that opens up for you, and we'll do the best that we can to accommodate as we can. So just be polite in this whole process, and hopefully everything will ultimately work itself out. But certainly, as soon as you know of the conflict and you can't resolve it, ask admissions.
Okay, show off your communication skills. That's what I heard. All right, when should I ask for accommodations?
So accommodations is going to be an interesting question. And one of the things you should have information from your admissions team, whether it's a virtual interview or an in-person interview, should hopefully be some contact information about requesting interview accommodations for your interview. Usually you should be able to ask the admissions team, the staff on the admissions team, about accommodations, and they should be able to have a protocol to tell you who you need to reach out to if it comes to needing a little bit more time. Now, I know for many of you this is important, especially for virtual interviews. You may need, for example, a little bit more, if you have an opportunity to do a little bit more extra time to process, say, a situation that you're reading for an MMI, and you might need a little bit more time to process that. You'll just have to see what accommodations can be made for your interview for that situation. If you need a little bit of extra time or something, who knows? If you're on site and on campus, it's possible that, and I've worked with people who may be hard of hearing. And so if you are requesting someone who can accompany you during your interview, who can appropriately decode or sign or whatever for you during interviews or during the interview day, you need to certainly ask the admissions team if that's allowed, or if the university itself has to provide that for you instead. So involve the admissions team as quickly as you can. There should be a protocol in place where they can leverage some of their resources with disability services or learning services, so that accommodations can be given to you for virtual as well as on-site, on-campus interviews. All
right, perfect. And we have a question from Tristan Should we be aware of any faux pas in this news cycle, stuff like AI, politics, or anything else? Don't use AI to write all your stuff. Don't talk about politics. What else is there?
Well, certainly if you're on a virtual interview, do not use AI running in the background to answer all your questions that you get during a virtual interview. And you think I'm joking, apparently there are anecdotes of that happening in the real job market. So please don't do that. Politics or anything else, obviously, there's something to be said about knowing how to navigate very, very carefully. And, you're going to have to learn that you're not going to agree with everybody once you get into medical school, dental school, or wherever else. Everybody has their own opinions. Faculty have their own opinions, staff have their own opinions. And so all you need to worry about for your own sake is appropriately navigating, your answers in a manner that is professional, as appropriately, politically agnostic or neutral, I don't know what the right term would be, as possible. But you probably can get a really good idea based on a lot of information that is already out there, that's promoted by professional organizations about their positions about certain hot topics. We have Becoming a Student Doctor that we're using for people who would like to have a little bit more coverage of how medical education, medical in general terms, what are their hot topics that they are introducing, and how are they managing the education of these topics and ability to at least carry forward and do experimental service or experimental learning in these topics in their curriculum or in their co-curriculum, so extracurricular activities and so forth. So that's something that we have in the Becoming a Student Doctor resource, and we really, we cite what various programs are currently doing in trying to address some of those big key questions. So, needless to say, there is certainly an overall sort of mindset that anyone who is a physician or a healthcare provider needs to keep in mind. But there is a certain way of explaining yourself without necessarily, sounding way too politically charged or emotional. So be aware of that. That's something you can practice. That's something you should practice with someone that you trust, who can give you appropriate feedback about, how your answer might be judged by people from various political or other personal perspectives. Just do the best that you can. But I don't know about these being anything new in terms of new landmines to navigate. There have always been very challenging topics to talk about all throughout healthcare and health education. And, this is, aside from that, nothing really new aside from our current context. So just be very mindful of that and practice.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Tristan. How much do interviewers know about my application? Do you know if I will get information about the people interviewing me?
So what you should be looking for in any invitation to interview that you receive, you need to make sure that these two questions are answered for you. How much do interviewers know about your application? Well, they should use terms such as it's open file or closed file. Open file means obviously anything that you've submitted to them, primary application, secondary application, possible letters of recommendation, are fair game. The interviewer has full access to your entire application and may choose to review it before meeting you, or may choose to review it after meeting you. Now there's also opportunities for it's an open file, but certain information is redacted. So that should be told very clearly to you when you receive an interview, that say your GPA, your MCAT score are not relevant to the interview phase. So those get blacked out or those are not accessible. Things that could bias an interviewer, such as the schools you were associated with, might be blacked out or blocked out for access. So you might just have an interviewer just have access to your secondary essays and maybe your personal statement, but maybe or maybe not some of the other extra essays that are in there, like other impactful experiences, possibly some of the anything else questions that that you may have been asked on your secondary. So you don't exactly know unless they tell you. And so just make sure that the interviewer, the admissions team is very clear for what information the interviewers have when they meet you. And this is for traditional, they'll talk about traditional conversational interviews. They could talk about structured interviews where there's already a scripted set of questions that all interviewers are required to ask you. There are one-on-one interviews. There are panel interviews where it's 2 interviewers or 3 interviewers asking questions to you. There are group interviews where there may be maybe 1 or 2 evaluators, and you are one of 3, 4, or 5 other applicants that are being interviewed at the same time during that time period. So there's a lot that's there, and that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. You should know what your interviewers are supposed to know about you. Now, do you know if I'll get information about the people interviewing me? Some schools are really nice about that they will tell you in advance who that person is. But most admissions offices are going to be a little bit more procedural, and they say, you're going to have an interview by a faculty member or a member of their admissions committee and a graduating student, a third or fourth year, whatever student, whatever it happens to be. So maybe you might be interviewed by a staff member or whatever. So they might give you sort of a general idea of the types of people they have in their interviewing core and who you might be assigned to. It's not common unless you are really targeting very specific tracks at a school that you will get specific, explicit information about the interviewer, such as, hey, a program director for MD, PhD, if you're doing MSTP or similar type research tracks or something like that. So pay very close attention, and you can always ask them if you will get a little bit of information maybe the day before your interview day. No promises. Sometimes interviewers get sick. Sometimes interviewers get caught in traffic or get caught in clinic. You just don't know, and just roll with the punches if they have to make a substitution at the very last minute. It's nothing against you. Just learn to adapt, and that's pretty much all you can do. So pay attention to these 2 questions and look for those. If they're not answered in any of the interview communications you got for your invitation, make sure you have the right to ask.
All right, sounds good. I have a scheduling conflict, so I can't attend an optional meet and greet. How will this affect my chances?
So I don't know how many of you have done virtual interviews, but certainly since the pandemic back in 2020, when clearly no one was doing on-campus interviews, a lot of the admissions teams, including the ones that I happen to be serving with, we developed an entire sort of array of opportunities for applicants who are invited to interview, and maybe some that have applied to us, can interact with members of our faculty, some students, members of our financial aid committee or financial aid team. And basically you get opportunities to get to know the school a little bit better. So optional meet and greets, basically. Surrounding a lot of virtual interviews, you have those opportunities. And when we were in person, and in some cases when you do have in-person interviews, you may wind up coming a day before because the admissions team happens to have scheduled something a little bit more than you just drop in, do your interview, and leave. They may actually have like a mini activities fair, or they might give you an opportunity to socialize with current students that are on campus, and you get a chance to meet and greet with all of them as well as other people who you're interviewing with during that day. So how does this affect your chances? Now, that's not exactly clear. I'll put it that way. It's not to say it's going to hurt you if you can't attend, but certainly if you do attend and you embarrass yourself, okay, there might be a little bit where that would affect your chances. So, always whenever you get a chance, go there with curiosity, have some good questions that you ask, and, expect the usual answers that you will get from everybody. I mean, we're going to handpick people for these meet and greets that are not going to bomb their own school, right? So, expect good vibrations and good conversations that everyone can have. And basically, if you can't make it, especially for virtual, most of us understand people work, people have to study, people have to travel, and just do the best that you can to go for the mandatory things if you're doing virtual interviews. For in person, we understand sometimes you can't schedule that plane flight to get you in time for you to go to the meet and greet. See if there are other ways that can be worked around, whether, you can go to that. If you can't go to the meet and greet for that particular interview day, what are other options? Do you have virtual options? Can I attend a different date that you're going to do a meet and greet for a different interview day? just ask around and see. It only serves to help you because you want to be able to feel comfortable around the people that you may be around for at least the next year, 2 years, 3 years or so. So it's to your advantage to go to a meet and greet if you can, but that again, if it's optional, technically it doesn't really matter in the whole thing of things when everything is all said and done, unless you really do something really bad.
All right, that makes sense. Again, if you guys have any questions, drop them in the chat, please. What should I bring to an on-campus interview?
So now you think this is an easy question, and actually it's not so easy because, a lot of students, whenever, you obviously have to dress up really nicely, but it really becomes just a question that people who do on-campus, who have to go to an on-campus interview, get really worked up about for whatever reason. Because some of them is like, what sort of watch should I wear? What should I bring a notebook, or should I bring like a tablet so I can take notes? Should I have a folder? All those sorts of things. So I'll make it very simple. Ask your admissions team what they would like for you to bring, or what they would suggest that you bring, whether it's a regular pencil, paper, pen, notepad, as opposed to something electronic, so that you're not tempted to be on your phone or on your tablet on the internet during the interview day, which would be bad. You could, I've been used to being in dental admissions for a long period of time. And, we would actually have students bring in their artwork because they wanted to show their hand skills. And so they would bring in their handiwork that they would like to show off to whoever their faculty interviewer happens to be. That's normal apparently for most people. And that's fine, but ask for permission. I've found that a lot of students, that whenever that has happened, there's a lot of students that feel a little bit more self-conscious that they can't actually bring a tangible object, or they were musicians. So you can't, what do you want to bring, a violin or your piano? You can't really bring a piano or an organ or whatever with you. So I think part of it is when other students bring stuff and other students don't, it just ramps up the anxiety level like 8-fold. Especially for the people who didn't bring stuff, because then they wonder, should I have brought something? So, best thing to do for sure, ask the admissions team what's acceptable. Is it okay if you bring a notebook, or are they going to provide a notebook for you and a pen or whatever else like that? So, but if at the very minimum, if they say it's okay for you to bring a notepad, bring a notepad. Just don't make it too hard on yourself if you're missing something, unless, they will have plenty of pens if your pen runs out of ink.
Yeah, bring multiple pens and have a professional kind of folder or something would be my suggestion. Can I take notes during my virtual interview?
All right, here's another area where a lot of people seem to have a lot of consternation about this. I would certainly say you should be able to take notes during your virtual interviews. And hopefully the people who invite you to your interview will clarify what you can, or quote unquote can or can't do. It's certainly understood that for multiple mini interviews that are done virtually, that you should be allowed to take certain notes. So if you have note cards or whatever else in front of you, you're allowed to take notes as you're reading the scenario or doing something like that. But generally ask for permission. I don't see why you can't take notes, other than the fact that if you are doing an MMI and you agree to, the questions remaining confidential, I don't know what they would want you to do with those notes. Usually if it's in person and you do an in-person MMI, we just collect all your notes and put them through a shredder. It's kind of hard to do that when you're on Zoom or when you're on these virtual platforms. So from my own standpoint, I think it's okay for you to have virtual notes, or notes for your virtual interview. This includes the questions you would ask your interviews if it were more of a conversational or structured interview and you were given finally an opportunity to ask questions. If there's anything to help you prep for a virtual interview, certainly make sure you have questions to ask your interviewers for virtual interviews, as also in-person interviews too. And so don't worry about it one way or another, but you should be able to just ask for permission.
Sounds good. Can I take notes during my on-campus interview?
Well, I would hope that you can. And again, this goes back to asking the admissions team, I think we all expect you to. I mean, we expect that if you did bring a folder, that you can ask questions to the interviewers. You could collect business cards of everybody that you meet at a meet and greet. Do whatever you need to do to collect whatever memories that you need during your on-campus interview. And hopefully it includes a pretty good, robust notebook that you can keep track of. You can try to jot down questions that you remember you probably want to clarify when it comes to, you got maybe a little bit stumped, or you were very bumpy when it comes to answering a question. You didn't have time to really think it through. So make sure if you had those, have those issues, write them down in your notebook. Don't share it with too many people, but give yourself a chance to have notes down so you can do follow-up. And again, I think this is one of the big questions, that everyone wants to know is like, thank you notes. So the origin of the material you use for any sort of thank you notes comes from your taking notes, especially during on-campus interviews. So I would think you should be able to, and hopefully the admissions team encourages you to collect those notes, especially on campus.
Can I take notes during an MMI interview?
So I would hope that the rules are such that you should be able to take notes. And so for a traditional MMI interview, if this were all in person, you would be staring at the papers, the sheet of paper with the scenario, and you'd have 1 or 2 minutes to look over the scenario, and theoretically you should be able to take notes, usually on an index card before entering the room and engaging with the person on the other side of the door. I would think that you should be able to take notes during an MMI interview. Ask what rules are available, in terms of you should be allowed. But if they say you can't, I'm not sure how one would enforce not taking notes during an MMI interview, but keep in mind that, they really want to make sure that MMI is done, as cleanly as possible, that you're not coming in with preconceived notes that would hopefully shape your answer. And, even if they did, I don't know how you would necessarily enforce it. So just be very mindful about what the admissions team would like for you to do. But, don't deliberately try to write down everything you possibly can about a scenario so that you can share with all your buddies and friends on your Discord channel later. Don't do anything that could otherwise undermine your own chances of getting into school, in other words. So I think you can take notes, but, hopefully within the constraints that the admissions team will tell you.
Yeah, asking questions is generally it's the right thing to do if you're not sure. If you guys have questions, please put them in the chat. How do I find out what questions they'll ask me?
Okay, so for many, many years, Student Doctor Network has had the interview feedback database. So we really encourage those of you, if you actually are using the database, to get and extract questions to anticipate what they will be asking you during your interview, please pay it forward and contribute to the database. It's really important that we have as many people active in the database as much as we possibly can, especially as things have always been changing a little bit. Now, clearly, you can't get any questions for which, and you should not share any questions for which you a promise to for a non-disclosure agreement. You can't give us scenarios that you get on an MMI, but you should be able to give us a good idea if they ask plain, good old, straightforward questions that might have stumped you. Some questions that might be totally off the wall. Whatever, as long as it's allowable to be shared online, one way or another. We don't want to get you in trouble, and we don't want to get in trouble for sharing things that are unauthorized. So that's one of the things that you can probably find out. Certainly in the same way that I know we share secondary essay prompts online, and sometimes the schools themselves share it, you might be a little bit surprised that some of the admissions ambassadors can talk about what their past experiences were when they were interviewing and what types of questions sort of surprised them, what questions they were prepared for, or they might suggest you would prepare for, those sorts of things. So, if aside from like the typical expected questions, tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in our school? What are your strengths and weaknesses? And probably a few others I'm not thinking of right now. Just generally just make sure you're prepared for it. And you also should make sure you know what you've said on your secondary. That will give you a little bit of insight of what questions they'd probably ask you, because especially for some of those traditional interviews for which they do have access to your essays, if they did decide to read your essays, including your secondaries beforehand, all of that is possible, fair game for any follow-up questions. So they might ask you for details for some stories that you may have disclosed in any of your essays, or they want to get a little bit more insight of maybe what you meant by that particular answer. Certainly for those of you who have some academic challenges on your academic record, you need to prepare for those questions, regardless. And so that's not something that is going to be a surprise. You should be prepared whatever you wind up doing. So again, traditional questions that you should be expected to answer. We've been telling people all about it. We have plenty of articles on the Student Doctor Network on the forums and in our blogs. There's plenty of people that can tell you what questions you should be prepared for.
Okay. Will anyone ask me about my past bad grades, institutional actions, or interruptions in my education? I've got all three of those. I mean, I'd assume I'm going to get asked about them.
So as I mentioned, you should be prepared to answer it. Now, will anyone actually ask you those questions? That will depend on the school. That will depend on the interviewer. There will be some situations where, if there are those types of items on your profile, it's certainly possible that an interviewer will be selected specifically to engage you to discuss those bad grades, those institutional actions, those interruptions. That's not a bad thing. It's just that they've trained somebody specifically to just really make sure they get that information to communicate to the admissions committee. So don't think of it as sort of a bad thing. This is basically a meeting with someone who hopefully will advocate for you in front of the larger admissions committee. So yeah, you should be prepared to answer this question, and you should be able to vet it and have other people who are your trusted confidants give you feedback on how you can answer this question, and still maintain some confidence that, I know I've had these issues before in my past. I'm still ready and I'm prepared for, medical school or whatever other program that you have coming up in spite of that. So make sure you practice it.
All right. Done and done. And remember, guys, interviews are a two-way street. This is a high-stress process, but you're feeling out if you want to be spending the next 4 years and a lot of money somewhere as well. So I always try to remember that when interviewing or what have you. Next question, what if I have a problem with the interview? So
I'm going to basically go to the punchline first, which is always ask the admissions team. So go to the admissions director or go to the admissions dean and just make sure that if there are any problems you have with your interview, that they know as soon as possible. There's been plenty of problems that you could imagine that can happen during an interview, such as, there are certain questions that you may feel very uncomfortable talking about because of the nature of the question. And I'm certainly talking about things that are a little bit more highly charged, especially when it comes to your health, your disabilities, and so forth like that. Things that are quote unquote illegal questions because they can inject bias, discriminatory bias into a decision. So any sort of circumstance like that, if you feel like you feel very, very uncomfortable that the interview is not a conversation, it's much more of an interrogation, that some lines may have been crossed that you feel very uncomfortable with, please understand, and it should be on the interview, any communications you have about the interview, to notify the admissions team or notify the admissions dean, to just make sure that they're aware of the problem that you had with that in-person interview. Now, virtual, you could probably imagine all the different questions and problems you could have during your interview. There's certainly instances where the interviewer somehow or another doesn't show up. They're having internet connections. There is a breakdown in the internet during the middle of your conversation or during the middle of an MMI or whatever else like that. Be aware of what you are supposed to do under those circumstances, especially for MMI. If there is some sort of disconnection, if a disconnection occurs in your video stream as you're answering, or maybe the next slide, the next situation doesn't come up, or it only came up for like 20 seconds instead of the full minute. Make sure whatever you do, you understand what the procedure is to report any problems with your interview. Could be the audio is out, who knows? I mean, again, if we're in the virtual world, you've probably experienced all the problems that have come when what we rely on with a very good, satisfying internet. So just make sure that you have that in mind. And if you feel that for whatever reason that there is anything that happened in the interview that made you feel uncomfortable or may somehow or another bias what you feel is a good conversation, or hopefully a good conversation about your application, please, don't hesitate to let the admissions team know. That's as long as it's in the purview of what they allow you to disclose. Now, many, and I think probably almost all admissions teams will usually do a post-interview survey. That's a place for you to disclose problems, but it's not the best place, especially when it comes to you. When we do a survey, we're looking at our overall interview process, and we're looking about how satisfied or how happy everybody was with their interview day. And quite frankly, if those of us in admissions do our job, you're going to feel like you did absolutely everything. You nailed the interview. Everybody nailed the interview. Everybody's happy. Everyone wants to see you at their school. You don't know what's really going to happen when decisions are actually made, but you at least know and feel you've been heard and you've done your best. That's all we ask you to do, and we use our surveys to confirm that. So the best thing to do is, of course, direct communication is always a little bit easier to disclose the problems, but please fill out the surveys just so that we all have a pretty good idea of what's going on.
All right, makes sense. We have a question from Sezo. I probably mispronounced that. My bad. For each school I interview at, should I memorize their core values and mission statement or write it down typed somewhere? Essentially, how well do I need to know the school I am interviewing at? I should probably know the basics for sure.
So, obviously, you probably should have done this for your secondary, of course, because many of the secondary essay questions will ask you how much you know about and align with their core values and mission statement. So, even though they're very important marketing things, I think it's just as important to know how you answered those questions about how you align with their core values and mission statement, because chances are they're going to ask you more about that, about what did you mean by this, when you answered this question, or maybe even something else. We have 5 core values and you gave us an answer to 2 of the 5. What about the other 3? So don't, I guess if you're doing a virtual interview, you probably would be very well served to have maybe a note card or a sticky pad or sticky note that basically underscores what the core values and mission statement are. I dare think that, in my day, people probably have it as a different tab. If you're on Zoom, we know you are not a multiple tab person, right? No, yeah, sure. So, I think you do need to know that, in a way, if we're smart and savvy about this, we know you probably may have it up there. So it's not like we're going to ask you to recite the core values and mission statement. That's not going to be the point. And so I don't see the point in memorizing it, especially if you wind up not going there. But you do need to know how you answered it and be prepared to have your answers for the other elements of their core values and your own discussion of the mission statement. And what you wrote on your secondary, you should be able to summarize it succinctly. And at least in a way that any interviewer should be able to pick up the fact that, oh yeah, you're giving me the highlights of what you wrote down. If it's an open file, certainly if it's closed file, they do not have access to what you answered. So you should be able to recount what you said. So that being said, now how well do you need to know the school you're interviewing at? Well, I hope you get to know very well of why you want to go to that school. I've always told people, if you're hopefully interviewing at a school, you want to be there. I would hope that that's the reason why you got the interview and you accepted an interview spot there. So I think it's probably best to say you should know the school at a pretty decent fundamental level about their curriculum, about certain things about their student support, certainly some things about the types of clinical opportunities that you get, like which hospitals they're affiliated with, and certainly what community service opportunities that they're involved with as it pertains to what their core values and their mission statement are. And also, what is their relationship to a university, if they have a relationship with a university. All those sorts of things you probably already have a decent clue about. And I will certainly recommend that this is all part of the research you should have done on each school before you submitted your application. So how well do you need to know the school you're interviewing at? Well, I hope you already know pretty well. Now, what delights us, if you show up on your interview day, virtual or in person, is how much more you're going to learn about the school after your interview day. So keep in mind, part of the challenge, as it were, it's not how much you know about the school, but how much more you know about the school when you're done with your interview, and how that makes you even more enthusiastic to go to that school. That's what's going to please most of us in the admissions team. It's like, oh yeah, they didn't know about our anatomy lab, and now they do, and now they're really excited to come. Hey, that makes us in the admissions team feel really well accomplished, that we did a job, we educated you. So just think about that in terms of, what do you know now? What do you want to know? Hence the questions that you ask your interviewers or anybody else during your interview day. And what more did you gain by the end of your interviewing experience with that school? And hopefully give you some insights should you wind up having that big board of, the schools that you really want to go to. Does that change in your mind, your priority list? Did they raise up? Are they up a couple ranks, or did you drop them a couple ranks after your interview experience with them? Again, most of the time, your interviews you're gonna really feel like you shined in your interview, because that's the way it's supposed to work. So don't, again, do your best on your side of the house to show who you are and show your best, and we'll just let the process run.
Good advice. All right, next question. Do I need to wear business attire for a virtual interview? Yes, you do. How about for other virtual events? You can probably get away with business casual, I'm guessing, but there's no such thing as too formal. Just don't be a weirdo and wear tux.
Exactly. There's no such thing as being too formal, unless you really are going to go tuxedo. And for doing that for a virtual, I don't understand why you would do that. Obviously, do what you can to show yourself in a professional light as much as you can. You should ask whatever questions you need to about business attire for a virtual interview. But for the most part, whatever you see on Zoom or on LinkedIn with people in business attire, a good jacket, maybe for men a good tie, or women in a nice light blouse. Do whatever you need to do to really showcase yourself professionally. This also includes, and I know I didn't mention this earlier, it meant, whatever you can do about your background so that nothing in your background is overly distracting when they actually meet you in person. I know mine, the way that the camera is cropped right now, you pretty much see my back wall. And if you had a larger picture, you'd see some of the posters. I'm sure some of you may have other, you're probably in your bedroom or something, and so you'll see your bed and maybe your dog or cat coming in and out of the room. Do whatever you can to kind of limit the distractions that come into your virtual frame. But there's a lot of advice out there about how you should make sure you frame yourself within the camera shot, and do the best that you can to light yourself so that people actually see you as best as they can. So business attire is very important because it is a professional interview. Make sure that the lighting is good and everything else sort of highlights who you are. And also for other virtual events, people do want to see you. So the lighting is important. And again, they'll hopefully tell you if it's okay for, appropriate business attire, business casual, button-down shirts and other stuff like that should be fine. But be prepared. You're going to be, you want to make sure your camera is on as much as you can. I know for those of you who are requesting accommodations so that you maybe get way too distracted when everyone's face, you have like 25 faces staring at you and you start getting anxiety, ask about that ahead of time again, just so that it's all pretty clear that, we all want to make sure we see each other and that we're engaged with each other during those conversations. I know it's tough to sort of stay focused and stare at a camera for an hour. That is what it is. So we'll see. Hopefully the people who run the show will give appropriate permissions to be on camera, off camera, certainly muting, all that has to go too. So, but yeah, present yourself appropriately professionally.
Makes sense. All right, we got a couple of questions. This one not specific to interviewing, but Mr. President is wondering, will a mistake in my application for the experience section, but creating a new experience to address this mistake, hurt my application. And real quick, there's another question here. What color suits do you recommend for interviews? Mr. Peasant, there is more information than you could ever hope to read through about business appropriate attire online. Just go Google that and you'll find everything you need to know.
Okay, so we'll get to this first question first. Will a mistake in my application for the experience section, but creating a new experience to address this mistake, hurt my application? I'm not entirely sure about how it affects, exactly which platform you're talking about in terms of creating experiences and so forth. And quite frankly, I don't know whether, I mean, I'm not going to be able to answer this in a vacuum without knowing what you did. And why you had a mistake and how big the mistake was and so forth like that. So basically unfortunately, the answer to this first question is it depends. And without any more details about it, that's all I can pretty much say. And again, we're focusing more on interviews. So the more important information is whether, if you have a mistake in your application and you're fortunate enough to go to an interview, would it be appropriate for you to highlight that mistake and correcting it, during your interview day? I mean, you could try. You can ask the admissions team. You probably have sent them an email or a message in their portal saying that, hey, I made this mistake, and I just want to make sure I corrected it. So there's probably other ways you can bring it up without necessarily falling on your knees and crying to the admissions gods, that you made this mistake. So I think we like to hype up our mistakes, our minor mistakes, quite a bit more than we should. And I think maybe this is one of those instances where it's not as bad as you think it is, but I don't know what your mistake really is to really comment on it more. So, if you said you won the Nobel Prize, but you didn't, I think that's a problem. But I think a lot of people have different variations of what those mistakes are. Let's go. What was the other question? He said about suits or outfits for interview.
Yeah, what color suits do you recommend? Black, charcoal, navy. Wear a white shirt, get a neutral colored tie, don't have the wrong colored shoes, make sure your belt matches your pants and jacket. And kids, if you're sitting down, you unbutton your sport coat.
Yeah, showing off is not a good time to do that during professional interviews. I mean, maybe those of us who are old enough and were part of the kerfuffle that happened when President Obama showed up in a tan suit, we could deal with that. But yes, as Kyle mentioned, we're talking relatively conservative. Don't go fancy. Don't go completely crazy. Dark colors is pretty much what you should really go for. Maybe not to the point where you look like you're going to a funeral, but at least look good. Again, I don't know. I haven't bought a suit in a while. I probably am overdue to buy a suit. I haven't gone to, I think that nowadays you can buy a suit for relatively inexpensively. It's a little bit cheaper than it was if you had to buy from some outfit that, only can make suits in Italy or in India. And so therefore it costs like $800 to get a suit. I don't think we're in that type of world, tariffs notwithstanding. But I think, definitely your regular power colored suits, the dark variety with a white shirt, that definitely works pretty well. If you're thinking about ties, regular plain colored ties are fine. Don't go crazy on patterns. I think there's a couple of resources. I know we had someone from a long time ago write an article about what you should wear for an interview for men and for women. So please look it up. If it's not in the blogs, it's definitely on the forums somewhere where we do have a lot of advice about what to wear for in-person interviews. And certainly for virtual interviews, you can kind of emulate the same thing. Just be mindful, again, people want to see you. So especially if you're doing, virtual interviews, anything in the light green chroma key category where you kind of blend in if you played around with the chroma key a little bit too much, that might be a little bit weird. I mean, I know I have a green screen that I sometimes will put in the back of my chair that, you can do a virtual background that way. Don't choose that color for your ties or for your shirt or anything else, unless you really want to, be profiled in some weird, wacky viral video sometime later in life. That you just don't do things like that. Certainly be mindful, if you do sequins, if you do if you have like a disco suit, something leisure suit, please, no, this is not the time for that. Keep it professional, and that means conservative is always good. Darker colors, please keep with darker colors, and everybody on the internet can tell you what a good suit should be.
Yeah, and we have threads about this on the Student Doctor Network forums. I have no idea about this for women, but again, there is a lot of advice out there on the internet. Go to the forums, ask those questions, and spend the money to get your suit tailored. Please get your suit tailored. Don't skip out on that, whatever you do.
A good suit is going to help you for at least the next 3 or 4 years. You're going to need it, so don't get it properly tailored and make sure it properly fits. And of course, keep your fitness going so you can always fit your suit.
Yeah. All right. So can I switch outfits or shoes for an on-campus interview?
So related to that, and again, I'm talking obviously mostly to women because, when women are usually interviewing you, many of you are probably wearing heels. Be mindful of that whenever you go to an on-campus interview. Sometimes the floors are going to be super slippery. And that's kind of, I know if you have not worn heels before, please, give yourself at least a week or so to break in new shoes or do whatever you need to do. I mean, you know better than me about, breaking in new shoes before an interview, because it's going to just be really awfully uncomfortable if you walk around in unbroken shoes. So can you switch outfits or shoes for an on-campus interview? Hopefully you should be able to. A lot of on-campus interview facilities, if I will put it that way, a lot of the offices will be able to hold your luggage during your interview day. And certainly they will tell you, hey, yeah, we expect you to go ahead. If you're already in your very good interview suit, you do not want to get spaghetti sauce on it because you're going to run over to the cafeteria really soon and they just have tons of tomato products all over the place. It should be okay for you to switch out of that interview suit into something a little bit more, business casual or business appropriate. So you could have lunch with your peers. You can go walking on the big, huge campus tour, even though you didn't realize it was going to be a 2-mile sort of circuit. You would be able to hopefully walk into the anatomy room where, maybe if it's not well ventilated, you can still smell the formaldehyde, which will stick onto your clothes, and that's really bad. And certainly, good shoes is always a good thing because, being able to walk around, you're okay with regular tennis shoes or whatever is appropriate there, that you will not slip and fall on things. When you are in cold weather climates, and I am very used to being in a cold weather climate, and it happens to snow, of course you probably should be able to change outfits or be able to sort of like put your coat in a closet somewhere so you're not always dragging it around everywhere with you. So you should be allowed. Ask the admissions team as appropriate, and they'll let you know if you have a certain amount of time, if you're doing an in-person interview or on-campus interview, whether you have time to actually do the outfit change without a phone booth, hopefully. But hopefully they'll be able to give you sort of an idea of how that would work.
Sounds good. All right, if you guys have any last-minute questions, please put them in the chat. How do I send thank you notes to the interviewers? This one's very important.
Yeah, this one's very important, and it also can vary quite a bit. So ask the admissions team first and foremost, because they should be the ones who should be able to explicitly tell you the best way to send thank you notes to the interviewers. So if you are there in person on campus, make sure you ask the interviewing team, or make sure you ask the admissions team before you leave how you should send thank you notes. Do they take emails? Do they want handwritten notes? Do the admissions team want to collect all those notes? Do you need to write one for every single person you talk to and put it in one envelope, send to the admissions team so they can distribute it? How about your admissions portal? Can you just send an email into the admissions portal and let that stand on its own? You should be able to get the protocol from each of your admissions committee members, or at least admissions team, about what to do, come the middle to end of your interview day, about how you can distribute thank you notes. Now, what are their preferences? I mean, I think for me, the major preference is knowing what the process is and how you get the thank you notes to the people that you hopefully want to receive them. The admissions team will certainly do whatever they can to collect it, document it, and share it with whoever your interviewers are. It's always a good thing to let them know they are appreciated because they are not being paid any extra to interview you. And they are doing this out of the goodness of their own heart, even if they are under so much other duress and stress from having to take care of regular students during the day. So please make sure that you express your appreciation for their time and the conversations that you've had with them, hence the notes that you've taken of your conversations. And certainly be very, express your gratitude. It really takes quite an effort to do an interview day, and to hopefully make it run smoothly, that you don't notice any of the bumps and problems that are happening in the background is really important. I also will certainly say, as someone who has been in the admissions team, you should think about sending thank you notes to your admissions team. The director loves getting those notes, whoever the assistant director is, if there's one, the administrators, the secretaries, the people who answer the phones or answer your emails, whoever they all, don't hesitate to send them a nice thank you note too. Now, notes are probably just fine if you want to, spend a little more money, like giving us, Starbucks gift cards or something. I'd save it for when you actually get accepted. That's just my suggestion. Don't bribe us first. Don't do that. Do it when you're really happy and you really want to confirm, hey, I am very excited to come to your school and do stuff like that. So thank you notes are really appreciative, and I hope it, be mindful. How do you send them? I mean, I would send them within the week of your interview day, certainly, 3 days, 5 days, depending on, if you're traveling or for whatever reason you book, you have a couple of interview days within a week. And so you're going to have to space yourself out, organize your thoughts appropriately, do whatever you can to do that. I will also say one more thing, and because of the world of virtual interviews, and I didn't mention this earlier because I wasn't sure how to bring this up as a question. Whatever you do, and I know virtual interviews makes things so much more convenient. You don't have to travel place to place and spend money on food and transportation and housing and lodging and stuff like that. Please, whatever you do, if you have virtual interviews, do not double book virtual interviews. Don't book them on the same day. It's certainly possible that you could do it in the morning and you can have one in the afternoon. Please don't do that, because it's going to be very easy to confuse yourself very quickly, and you just don't want to risk that one way or another. We've had plenty of people, certainly during COVID, who've tried to double book their interviews and to do 2 interviews in one day. First of all, if you're that lucky, good for you, but please don't do that. Also, another thing that I should also note, that if you do have virtual interviews or even in-person interviews, please pay attention to time zones. And I know with virtual interviews, it really makes it easy for some of you all to interview from practically anywhere in the world. We have had people who've interviewed from Europe or from Asia for their interview day. And so, they have to get up at some weird hour or stay up at one weird hour in order to attend their interview day, their live interview day, according to the appropriate time zone. And there have been many times that people miscalculate their time zones for some odd reason, or they assume that a time zone that's listed for them or a time that's listed for them is the one that applies to their time zone when their school's actually in a different one. Again, I'm used to being East Coast time, and we have people from California or Arizona that are in different time zones, and they arrive at a very strange hour for their interview day and miss their assigned time because they did not pay attention to time zones. So please make sure you pay attention to that if you're doing virtual interviews. That's going to be something that will help you tremendously, and you don't have to double back in embarrassment and say, I'm sorry, I totally screwed up on the time zone. We shouldn't have that problem anymore, but it might surprise you.
Yeah, that's good advice about not double booking, because in the event an interview got pushed and same day is not advance notification. If you guys have any last minute questions, please drop them in here with respect to what to wear. Whoops, wrong thing. All right, good quote from a thread on appropriate attire. My personal feeling is that if you lose the jacket and you look ready to hit the club, you have gone wrong. That is very true. Look like an adult. This is not the time to make any kind of statements. Don't wear any wacky wingtip, two-tone shoes. Don't look like the trombonist from a ska band. Like, just play it safe, you know?
Are there still trombonists and ska bands around? Oh, gosh, I don't know.
So, I don't know. I just need something that's tied with two-tone wingtips.
I mean, on the other hand, if you are in an in-person interview and you do happen to have that type of getup to go party with everybody after interview day or during a social, okay, you could do that. But, you know, please, if you drink, pay very close attention. Don't get too happy.
Yeah, there's always going to be exceptions to the rules, but playing it safe is always, it's never inadvisable with respect to formal or business wear in this case.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys very much for joining us and all of your questions. And we will be back next Sunday. I
think a couple of Sundays out, actually.
Couple of Sundays?
Yeah.
I really should be prepared for this end part.
Oh, wow. That's all right.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we'll be back in about 2 weeks. It'll be the back to school questions. So if you're going back to undergrad, graduate school, all those sorts of things to get you how to get yourself prepped and ready to go back to school while still in the application process. Let's see how you do. So.
All right, and that is July 27th. Back to school. Great. I can gripe about my tuition bill.
Yeah, and I know for a lot of people, this is a big shock. We're already talking about back to school. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Some of you, we already have people in, doing white coat ceremonies starting first year of medical school already. So, getting back to fall terms and fall semesters is not far behind, now that we're like in many cases, about a month before school starts.
Yeah, I think I got like a month and 8 days. So there we go. All right, that'll be 9 p.m. Eastern on the 27th. All right, thank you guys again, and we will see you all next time. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us.